Greetings! In this video series, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence. We're going to talk about the characteristics of AI and then introduce the Turing test. We're going to show you how you can use the Turing test to decide if a computer system is behaving intelligently. We're going to differentiate between weak and strong AI, talk a little bit about history, and articulate the major types of problems that AI can either solve or potentially help us solve someday. In short, we're going to show you why AI is such a big deal and why you need to know about it as future officers. As a quick disclaimer, a lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about in this lesson are representing the frontier of our knowledge of computer science. A lot of the things we've talked about thus far in the course, we've had plenty of years. Programming hasn't really changed that fundamentally in 30 years. In contrast, AI seems to be changing almost every day. So much so that by the time you graduate, there's a good chance that the information we've shown you in this lesson is outdated in at least some respect. Nevertheless, we think it's important for you to have some fundamental understanding of AI so that you can better understand the strengths and limitations of the technology, and more importantly, as you become Air Force officers, you can better help us decide when and where it makes sense to apply the technology. So to get us started, I thought we'd do a quick word association. What comes to mind when you think of the term artificial intelligence? For some people, it's going to be, the straight up sci-fi, right? Commander Data from Star Trek, Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. My son is a huge Disney buff, so when he thinks of AI, he tends to think of cute, adorable robots. But if you are Elon Musk or some other folks in Silicon Valley, you might have a more pessimistic view. You might think of war games, thermonuclear warfare, or, the Terminator. Yeah, we definitely don't want that to happen, right? So, as you can see, there's a whole spectrum of the good and the bad of AI. So what does AI actually mean in this course? For CS110, we're going to define AI basically as the field of computer science that wants to create systems that can think like humans, think rationally, act like humans, act rationally. In some ways, it's not a very satisfying definition. In many ways, it's not meant to be. John McCarthy, who is oftentimes considered to be one of the fathers of AI, said quite succinctly that one of the challenges that we have with describing intelligent systems is that we have a hard time describing what makes us intelligent. As a result, it's hard for us to evaluate systems or other entities by that same standard. And it's really interesting because when you look at the world, even though we don't have a great sense of what makes something truly intelligent, we have some ideas. It hasn't stopped us from making AI technologies proliferate throughout the world, right? Everything from Alexa to Google, all your voice recognition, facial recognition. When you play a game against a computer, there are tons of examples of how AI affects your everyday life. But at the same time, there's an academic side that's laying the foundations so that we can build these types of technologies. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in philosophy and mathematics, but the general idea of understanding what logical thought is and rational thought and being able to encode it in a symbolic format is something that is pivotal and important for computer scientists to be able to take that information and use it to construct systems that mimic or maybe in some cases exhibit intelligent behavior. There's a lot of other factors that play into it: sociology, robotics, biology, the cognitive sciences. It's easy to think of computer science as being the tip of the spear, but in reality, we are leveraging very heavily the other disciplines in order to give us the foundation of what intelligence is so we can make systems that try to mimic that behavior. So now that we've talked a little bit about what AI is, now let's go through the history of AI so you can see how the technology has evolved over the years. So the early days of AI were really focused on the idea of whether or not a computer could really think. You have to remember at this time that computers were basically giant extravagant calculators that were used by the army to calculate trajectories of projectiles during World War II. So the idea of a computer thinking and not just doing math seemed interesting. So there were a lot of people who were thinking about this idea of what criteria would a computer have to be to satisfy for us to say that it in fact is actually thinking. So we had you read Alan Turing's Can Machines Think paper, or at least an excerpt from it, and in it he describes this idea of an imitation game, and we'll get more into it. But here is an attempt to describe a test that we could apply to computers to say, are they thinking or are they not? It took many years after this initial question was even asked that we could start to even build systems that tried to mimic thinking to some extent. Here, for example, is a mathematical proof program that was developed in the early 50s. Basically, given a starting mathematical known and a desired outcome, could it generate a proof for you? The system wasn't very intelligent, it just tried all the rules, but again, the idea of a computer producing a mathematical proof was a step towards this idea of making a system that could think on its own. So now let's talk a little bit more about the imitation game that Turing came up with. Sometimes this is referred to as the Turing test. The general idea is that you have this human questioner, and he's sitting in the middle, he's isolated from respondents, and those respondents can be either a computer or a human being. And all the questioner can do is submit a question and get a response. The basic idea here is that Turing said, we may not be able to describe what intelligence is, but if a human being can't tell the difference between a human response and a computer response, for all intents and purposes, isn't it enough to say that that computer is intelligent? So you can think of it as just a blind test to determine if I could be fooled, then a computer is intelligent. If I know that it's a computer, then it fails the test. So here's a very extravagant form of the Turing test from the movie Ex Machina. Real Turing tests aren't this fancy, but this gives you a sense of what we're talking about.
Do you have a name?
Yes. Ava.
I'm pleased to meet you, Ava.
I'm pleased to meet you too. I've never met anyone new before. Only Nathan.
Then I guess we're both in quite a similar position.
Haven't you met lots of new people before?
None like you.
So the next step in AI history was what they call the golden years, but basically it was just a time where people started to really sit down and say, okay, let's see if we can actually build systems that are intelligent. There was a famous Dartmouth meeting where they coined the term AI. They basically brought together a bunch of computer scientists, sociologists, behavioral scientists, brought them all in a room and said, hey, can we develop something that is artificially intelligent? And you gotta love the beard, by the way. But these people thought, hey, we could actually build it. Maybe we could do it over the course of a summer. And as we all know, it would end up taking much longer than that. But over the years, they would discover that they could build little systems that demonstrated some form of intelligent behavior. So Eliza, you'll have a chance to play with, is a chatbot. And then the general problem solver was developed by Newell and Simon as basically another type of proof machine. At the same time, you had sci-fi authors going crazy, right? Basically, that's when the Space 2001 was written. The idea of building systems that were more intelligent than humans, it's something we thought was certainly going to be possible in the near future. So once we got to the 70s, there was a realization that it was very difficult to build AI systems that were any more than toy problems. We could build a little chatbot, or we could build a mathematical proof application, but it was hard to build a program that could maybe do medical diagnoses, give legal advice, all the more advanced projects, right? And from the mid-70s to the 90s, the solution was to try to build what they called expert systems. And an expert system, simply put, is a system that is designed to behave like a human expert. So the idea is that we would build a system, we would interview a bunch of humans, and then we would build a system that had a bunch of if statements, and those if statements corresponded to every possible situation that the AI might find itself in, and the best thing to do in that situation. So here, for example, is a little decision tree that an expert system might use to determine whether to call someone Mr., Ms., or Miss, right? And this works very well for very simple problems because it's very easy to write all the conditions that they might experience. It's a lot more difficult, however, when you're trying to do like medical diagnoses, right? If I come in with a cough, it's not clear to me whether or not I have the flu or I have a life-threatening disease, right? So it turns out that human beings are also really bad at explaining why they do things the way they do. You are an expert in being a cadet, but if I was to tell you to write down all the rules you use for being a cadet, you'd probably have a hard time doing that, right? Human beings are very good at being experts. They're hard at explaining how they're experts. And again, during the same time, this isn't stopping the sci-fi writers from thinking that we're just on the verge of the next greatest thing. It wasn't until the 90s that we started to see AI systems that would really demonstrate the potential of AI to solve really complicated problems. So in the mid-90s, we started seeing systems that could play chess and checkers. In fact, when I was in 6th grade, we saw a video where Deep Blue, which was a supercomputer, actually beat a chess grandmaster, and that was actually very interesting. So here's a quick clip from that one.
Gary Kasparov has arrived. He was under tremendous stress, I imagine. The program wasn't behaving the way he was expecting.
He thought that he was going to figure out the computer.
And he wasn't mentally prepared for it, I think.
I mean, the whole game was surreal. What was he doing? It didn't really make any sense.
Whoa! Deep Blue has instantly sacrificed with Night Capture's E6.
Deep Blue was just sitting there and just keep on attacking, just moving pieces around. And he knew he was in trouble.
But at the end, Kasparov he stands up, he starts gesturing, he looks over at his mother. I think having your mother in the room where you're playing an important chess game is not a great idea, as much as I love my mom.
It wasn't until about 2007 that they actually solved checkers, and by that I mean they actually produced an AI that knew every possible game of checkers that could be played, so it could never be defeated. And in 2011, we actually saw Watson play. Watson is an IBM supercomputer, and that one was actually able to play and defeat champions at the game of Jeopardy. So here's a quick clip of that.
Please make a selection.
I've never said this on TV. Chicks dig me for 200, please, Jimmy.
Kathleen Kenyon's excavation of this city, mentioned in Joshua, showed the walls had been repaired 17 times. Watson.
What is Jericho?
Correct.
400, same category.
This mystery author and her archaeologist hubby dug in hopes of finding the lost Syrian city of Urkesh. Watson.
Who is Agatha Christie?
Correct.
Same categories.
So that was pretty exciting, and back then what was cool about Watson was that it was actually able to gauge its confidence in how well it knew the answer, so it only bet and it only tried to answer a question when it knew that it had a high probability of getting the answer. So that brings us to today, and today what we're really seeing is the development of AI systems that take advantage of big data and what we call deep learning. So we now live in a time where we have the ability to collect vast amounts of data, more data than we could have ever stored in the history of computing. And we now have faster computers and cheap storage that allows us to store and process that data very quickly. So the idea of doing this is that we can now generate AIs that can extract patterns that a human being wouldn't be able to derive from the data, learn from past experiences, and be able to look at millions of possible decisions every second. And again, this is all due to the fact that computers are getting smaller, they're getting cheaper, they're getting more powerful all the time. And this has allowed us to do some really exciting stuff. So here, for example, is an example of Tesla's autopilot system. And here you can actually see it driving down the road. There is a human being in the car, but this is only for legal purposes. They had to have a human being who could grab the wheel just in case something went wrong. So here you're seeing the system actually drive, and on the right side you can actually see all of the algorithms that are running behind the scenes. So you have systems that are trying to detect road signs, lines, people, obstacles, that sort of thing. I've had an opportunity to be in a Tesla. It scared the heck out of me because it's kind of magical that it's working. But what's really interesting about this is that the car learned how to drive, and when they trained it, they taught it how to drive without explicitly teaching it the rules of the road. They actually gave it so much driving data that the car was able to learn on its own. So that's exciting because it's able to do it, but at the same time kind of scary because now you have to trust that the system's actually doing the right thing. Right? So now that we've talked about the history of AI, I'd like to go through some additional terminology. The first thing I want to talk about is strong versus weak AI. And the big differentiator here is whether or not an AI has the ability to solve lots of problems, and lots of different problems, or one specific problem. So a strong AI, you can think of it as an AI that is a more general purpose. It can solve problems, but more importantly, it can use the experiences that it learned in one problem domain and apply them to others. So it can play a game of chess and maybe paint a painting and maybe write poetry. Right? A weak AI, by comparison, is designed to do one specific thing. So Deep Blue is fantastic at playing chess, right? Better than grandmasters. But the trade-off is that Deep Blue would never be able to play a game of checkers, even though the games are very similar to each other. In terms of their capabilities, strong AIs tend to have the ability to improvise, they can learn, they can communicate, they can do things that are above and beyond a specific task. And again, with weak AI, now their ability to think for themselves is really limited. They're going to perform the tasks that they're designed to do, but no more, right? And they may be able to learn to some extent, but within narrowly defined scopes, right? So when you think of strong versus weak, you can think basically that strong AI is every cool AI you have ever seen in like movies and in Hollywood, and weak AI is basically the AIs that you get to play with. Siri, Alexa, video game AIs. All those systems are really good at doing one thing, but they can't really be generalized to other problem domains. So you can see the limitation of ourselves right now is that we want to build strong AI, but right now we are still in the phase where we mainly build weak AI. Now let's talk a little bit about AI environments. So whenever we talk about building an artificial intelligence, we have to talk about the types of problems and the environment in which that AI is going to exist in. So we have to talk about the characteristics of the problem. So for example, a fully observable versus a partially observable problem. A fully observable problem, we have access to all the information that we need to make a decision. So for example, checkers is fully observable because I can see all the pieces on the board and where they are. And partially observable might be something like driving, where I can see what I can see through the windows, but I might have blind spots, or I might not know what's happening 5-10 miles down the road. Competitive versus collaborative. In a competitive environment, the AI is going to be competing with other agents that have opposite goals. So you're playing checkers against an AI that's trying to beat you. So one wins at the expense of another. In a collaborative environment, you can think of AIs that can work together. So a game where everyone can succeed and get to the end. So maybe like a maze or something. Discrete versus continuous. A discrete environment is turn-based, so checkers, you can think of it as a discrete environment because every move is a discrete event in that game. And continuous simulation might be something more like driving, where every little instant something is changing. And then deterministic versus stochastic. The big difference here is that when in a deterministic environment, I know the outcome of my action with 100% certainty. So in chess, for example, if I were to move a piece, I know for 100% certainty that my piece will make it to its destination. In a stochastic environment, there is some probability that that action might succeed or fail, right? Or that something unexpected might happen. So the outcomes of my action are not known with 100% certainty. So now that we've been through some terminology, we've been through the history, we've talked about what AI is, let's talk about the types of problems that AI can currently solve. Lots and lots of AI algorithms out there, more being developed every year, but in general, when you look at the types of problems, you can break them down to one of these 7 categories, and we're going to go through each one right now. So in classification, what we're trying to do is put the thing in the correct bucket. So in this example, we have pictures of dogs and things that are not dogs. And the idea is that through lots of training examples, we can teach an AI what a dog is. And then when the AI gets a new photograph, it's able to sort it and say, this picture either looks has the features of a dog, so it belongs in this bucket, or it looks nothing like a dog, so it belongs in this other bucket. In clustering, we're trying to do something similar. We're trying to find similar looking data, right? In this situation, we don't know what the buckets are. So here, for example, we have data on an XY plane. We might look at this grouping and say, hey, these look similar to each other, so we cluster them together, and we might find clusters of data across all the points. And then when a new instance, when a new piece of data arrives, we can say, well, you're pretty close to this cluster, you must be one of the cluster ones, for example. So the idea here again is to be able to group things and when we don't know necessarily what the buckets are in advance. In optimization, we're trying to find the best, the min, the max, that sort of thing. Here, for example, is a classic computer science problem. It's called the traveling salesman problem. The idea is, can we find a path that visits all the capital cities in the continental United States without visiting a city twice? So here you can see an AI trying all the various combinations of paths until it settles on one that has the shortest distance. For small city problems like 50 cities, a computer can reasonably solve it. When you start getting to 10,000, 20,000, 100,000 cities, these are the types of problems that can bring a computer down to its knees. There's just so many possible combinations of paths that the computer is just not able to look at all of them. So there's a lot of cleverness that goes into trying to optimize these types of big problems. In anomaly detection, we're trying to find the thing that looks not like the others. So here, for example, we have a chart showing energy consumption across days, and you're seeing here what the AI thinks the normal consumption is, and then when it sees something out of the normal, that's your anomaly, right? So we also do this on network security, which we'll talk about much later in the course, but the idea of being able to look at network traffic and say, hey, you don't normally send 50,000 terabytes of data to another country, that sort of thing might be flagged as different behavior, and we can use that to detect if a network's being compromised. With ranking and recommendations, the goal is to get the AI to predict the next thing you're going to do based off what you've done before. So when you're on Netflix and you've watched a lot of Star Trek, maybe it'll suggest to you Star Wars, even though that would be a poor recommendation in my opinion, because one's clearly better than the other. But in my own life, when the first time I taught, I typed 50 Shades of Grey into Amazon in order to show my students how cookies worked, I swear. And then for years afterwards, I paid for it, because my wife always laughed at me that 50 Shades of Grey just kept on showing up as like a recommendation for me. And finally, with data generation, we're using AI to produce some novel piece of information. So for example, maybe a cool looking picture, that has never been produced before, or music. And it's always interesting to see what they produce, because sometimes they make music that clearly isn't music, or maybe it's mathematically cool, but it just doesn't sound right. These are always interesting. I actually enjoyed these the most. Now that we've talked about all the things that AI has been applied to, it's important to remember that, like I said before, this is a rapidly evolving field. So there are lots of problems that we still haven't come up with good solutions for. Like I said before when we talked about strong versus weak AI, a big problem with current AIs is that they tend to be optimized for a specific task. Every time we want to build a new AI, we tend to have to start from scratch. We can't take a checkers AI and just instantly turn it into a chess AI. We've got to do a lot of retooling. In terms of data, we need lots of data to teach AIs how to do things. So like to make the Tesla car drive, they needed years upon years of driving data from many different drivers before they had enough examples that they could train the AI. And oftentimes that data needs to be formatted and configured in a way that the AI can consume. And in future lessons, I'll show you what exactly I mean. But simply put, there's a reason there's a data science major. It turns out that's a really hard problem. Overfitting is another challenge of AIs. AIs sometimes get really good at memorizing the problem rather than understanding the concept. So for example, maybe it would learn that 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 4 plus 4 equals 8, but it's very easy for an AI to just memorize that when I see a 2 and 2 that's 4, when I see a 4 and 4 that's an 8, versus understanding the concept of addition. And that's important because if I only memorize the questions and the answers, then I won't know what to do when I encounter a new situation. What we want is the AI to learn a generalized rule so that it can apply its knowledge from the training examples to new situations and be successful. Interpretability is another issue. It's oftentimes hard to trust that an AI is doing the right thing. Sometimes we want to know what's going on underneath the hood, especially when I was in a Tesla and it starts slowing up or speeding down. You want to make sure that the AI is actually doing something sensical and not braking in front of you and potentially putting you in harm. So this is always a challenge. A lot of these algorithms don't do a good job of explaining why the AI is doing what it's doing, and as a result, it's hard for us to build trust in those systems. And finally, the big problem is problem complexity. Even problems that we think are simple tend to be really, really complicated. So in tic-tac-toe, I didn't realize there are over 5,500 legal moves you can make in that game, and it's such a small game, right? You wouldn't think it's that complicated. A game like chess has 7.7 times 10 to the 45 possible board configurations. So it's easy to lose track of the scale of the problem, and because of that, it's really hard for us to understand just how much work is required sometimes to make the AI be effective in those types of problem domains. So in this video, we've primarily been focusing on the general AI concepts. In the next couple lessons, we'll have an opportunity to dive into different aspects of AI. In following videos, we're going to show you how to build your own systems that can play games, and how we can go through the sense, think, act process. And then we'll show you the machine learning process and how you can train a model without having to explicitly program the computer what to do in every situation. And finally, we're going to talk a little bit about ethics and the implications of having AIs make life or death decisions, especially in the military. As we start getting more and more comfortable with AI, we're going to reach a point where we're going to want to have AIs make decisions, maybe even combat decisions on a user's behalf. So it's going to be very interesting for us to discuss, like, what are the implications when we allow AIs to make life or death decisions, and ultimately who's at fault when something goes wrong. So that's it. In this lesson, we've provided you with just a quick overview of what AI is. We've talked a little bit about the Turing test, weak and strong AI. We went through history, and we talked about the types of problems that AI can solve or potentially help us solve. In subsequent videos, we're going to go more into detail, so I hope you're excited about what's coming up. This is the newest content that we've produced in CS110, and we're very proud of it, and we're really excited for what's coming up. So stay tuned, and thanks for watching.